So this summer, members of the Green Party of England and Wales will be voting to elect a new executive, commonly known as GPEx. Now, members of GPEx are elected to specific portfolios, and today I'm joined by one of the candidates for the External Communications Coordinator post. Before I introduce them, I just have one thing to ask you to do, which is to scroll down right now and hit that subscribe button. It means that you won't miss out on all the other interviews we're putting out with the GPEx candidates, the candidates for Deputy Leader of the Green Party, and also any other video we're putting out in the coming weeks and months. It doesn't cost you a penny and it helps Bright Green out massively too. So please do scroll down and hit subscribe right now. So without further ado, I'll introduce the candidate that we have with us today. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Molly Scott Cato. Molly, how are you doing?
I'm fine, thanks, Chris.
Great. So I'm going to throw a bunch of questions to you, but to start off, hopefully a straightforward one. How do you think you can improve the Green Party's comms?
Well, I've been in this role for the past 2 years since coming back from Brussels after Brexit. And really what I've managed to do is build relationships with the team and build up the spokespeople list. And those were kind of priorities I announced last year. And it's likely, in fact, it seems to me highly likely we'll have an election during the next 2-year period. And so I'm standing again because I think it's important that we have somebody with experience that's a safe pair of hands managing our comms over the next 2-year period. The thing I would like to improve most, and I feel we've made some progress on this, but there's still a long way to go, is improving the diversity of the people who speak on behalf of the party. We've got a process in place now, which was agreed with GPEx, and we are encouraging some people of colour, some Greens of colour to stand. So we're making progress there, but we really do need to go a lot further, particularly in terms of, that kind of representation. We're not doing too well, too badly in terms of women, obviously, and also LGBTIQA+ people generally. But on the ethnic diversity front, it's just not good enough, and we need to improve that. Of course, the other thing we all know we need to improve is get a lot more coverage, and that's a little bit like everybody has their own ideas about that. It is difficult. I'm working with the staff team on that. A lot of it's about relationships, a lot of it's about just how many people you have there sort of blagging the phones. But yeah, obviously that's always a priority for somebody in my post, or the post I have been in.
So there's a bunch of stuff you said there that I want to pick up, including around the spokespeople and diversity and so on. But before we move on to that, we at the moment are living through one of the most intense heat waves we've ever seen. We have, forecasts in the UK for potentially over 40-degree heat. The climate crisis really very much at our doorstep and people feeling it right now. We also have the worst cost of living crisis in living memory, with inflation soaring, and that's going to bite particularly from the autumn. And we also have a government in crisis following the kind of deposing of Boris Johnson and the Tory leadership election going on as well. And as you mentioned earlier, the potential for a general election very, very soon as well. So in that context, what do you think the key messages that the Green Party should be putting out are?
The most important message at the moment is that all these crises are the same crisis, effectively, and the way they intersect with each other is sometimes made into a dichotomy, because really bizarrely, the journalist's position is, oh, well, people's incomes are under pressure, so we can't do any of that green stuff anymore. Whereas obviously that's absurd to all of us. That seems completely absurd. It probably was made up by the fossil fuel industry, who then rang up lobbyists, whatever, and made that story up. But what we have to do is say what we need to do to tackle the climate crisis is exactly the same thing we need to do to actually get ourselves off dependence on Putin, but also tackle the cost of living crisis, which is free insulation of people's homes, develop our own domestic renewables. I mean, it's really sort of tragic to me that I now have a heat pump and I'm on a fixed energy tariff until June next year with good energy. It's all renewable supply. So I am affected because the market speculation and profiteering means that the price of my electricity is going up, but it really doesn't need to, because the price of wind hasn't gone up, the price of the sun hasn't gone up. They're both free resources. And I've been able to put in that heat pump because I was paid such a ridiculous amount of money as an MEP, and I saved that and insulated my home and paid for a heat pump. But what's outrageous is that people on lowest incomes don't have access to that. And so, I mean, there's a really important example here of how climate justice, social justice, environmental justice, they're all the same thing. We know that. It's actually not hard to communicate that, but it appears to be hard for journalists to sort of grasp that point. So I think that's to tie together all the points you made. That's the most important thing for us to be getting out right now, and we are trying to do that. And sometimes we do that successfully, and sometimes, like, strangely, now we've moved from a situation where it's like, oh, it's hot weather, great, let's go to the beach and have an ice cream, to, oh, it's hot weather, everybody's going to die. But through that whole process, climate change was barely mentioned. So anyway, I can promise you we are banging away about that. And that's, you know, we really have to continue to do that. Also, of course, the point about jobs, you know, as economics and finance spokesperson, which I am as well, you know, it's really important that we discuss the move towards sustainability as a positive economic benefit, not just in terms of creating well-paid, high-skilled jobs, but also because it will enable us to move towards an economy where we're not all on a sort of appalling work treadmill. So, yeah, some people probably watched the Tory leadership candidates last night, and, you know, when it got to the net zero question, they were all sort of posturing as to how to be, you know, most hard line on not tackling the climate emergency, whereas we know that addressing the crisis in employment, the crisis of low wages, and the climate crisis, we have the solutions to all of those, and they all work together.
So one other aspect of comms, in addition to messaging, is audience, and it's a really important part of doing comms effectively, is understanding who you're speaking to, what motivates them, how to reach them, and what you want to get them to do as a result of that. So for the Green Party, for all political parties, they you know, they build coalitions of voters, they build coalitions of the electorate that you know, that they intend to get out to vote for them or to support their vision or whatever it is. Who do you think the kind of key demographics and people in the country are that the Greens should be speaking to right now? And how do you think that the Greens can better reach those people?
This is a really important question, because the people that we need to communicate with are not always exactly like ourselves, and it's a skill. You know, we have media staff. It's not a voluntary operation anymore. It's not me that develops these messages. We have staff that do that, and our objective here, and this is why I'm standing again, is that we need more MPs. So as you say, we're in a majoritarian system. That means that we have to get a majority of people in our target seats to vote for us to win more seats. And that means if we target our messages too narrowly, we won't win those seats. But at the same time, we don't want to fall into that trap that Tony Blair took the Labour Party into, which they're still stuck in, which is just like trying to be everything to everybody. And this is indeed a tension that we have to manage in our comms operation. Now, there's a big piece of work underway at the moment with polling and focus groups and so on, where these questions are being refined in terms of actually speaking to people. I'm not involved in that because I'm like on the political side, and staff are spending a lot of time doing that. But I'm very interested to hear some of the things that I do hear coming out. Some of the messages that we get across, like addicted to fossil fuels, for example, is a really unpopular thing to say. So it's not really about demographics there. It's just like nobody liked that message. We can find a positive way of saying moving beyond fossil fuels rather than we're addicted to fossil fuels, which makes people feel insulted. So part of the focus groups is about that, but it's also very much about defining what kind of people out there are more likely to vote for us. And I'm not, I'm not sure how much of this is public, what phase it's at the moment, but I'm sure I'm allowed to say that Lib Dem votes are incredibly soft in our direction. So Lib Dems are very willing to vote Green, even though our policies are obviously considerably more radical than theirs are. Labour people are much more likely to return to Labour when the election comes. So that's a kind of trade-off we need to make. And then we've also got people who are just like anti-establishment, and they also like us, but they're quite right-wing on a lot of things, and their values often don't coincide with ours. So I would say that those three groups there that we're looking at and thinking about, and what we're trying to do is come up with messages and framings that work for all of them without compromising our basic political stance. And that's a skilled operation, and most of that's being done by staff. But obviously I always want to say, I do say addicted to fossil fuels, although I've stopped saying that now, but I also want to, wave my capitalist pig that I showed you earlier and make this kind of message. But I do understand from more skilled and expert people than myself that if it's messages that only appeal to me, the people like me and probably like you, Chris, actually an awful lot of them just go and vote Labour when the election comes because we're better informed, we're much more susceptible to Labour's squeeze messaging. Anyway, this is a complex answer to a very important question, but I would say, to summarise, there's a lot of work going on to understand exactly how to do that and exactly how to get majorities in those parliamentary seats, because I think most people in the party agree that that's the priority now, and it's certainly the priority we've got in our democratically agreed strategy.
So there's a few interesting things I think you picked up there, and there's a tension I wanted to kind of unpick a little bit. So you mentioned obviously what kind of the Labour Party went through under Blair, which as you kind of described, it was trying to appeal to offer all things to everyone, and then eventually appealing to no one because everyone was let down by that. And I guess that's a similar kind of process that the Lib Dems went through, right? In terms of, if you look at pre-2010, the Lib Dems were hyper-localized in their messaging. They would pick off kind of, dissatisfaction with the Tories and Labour from both sides. If you were in one part of the country, the Lib Dems would be saying one thing. If you're in another part of the country, they'd be saying something totally different. They get into government in 2010 and they let down everyone. And it's interesting the kind of the demographics of voters, or the kind of voting patterns of voters that you identified as potential areas where the Greens can benefit from, being, current Lib Dem voters. I think what you described as kind of anti-establishment voters who are, can be quite right-wing. I'm guessing what the kind of profile of those people are, perhaps people who, went for UKIP or the Brexit Party in 2015 and so on. That's quite a hard coalition to kind of keep together, right? In terms of, social liberals and people who are, soft left kind of Lib Demi types with kind of potentially more kind of culturally conservative anti-establishment UKIP types. How do you square that circle about bringing those people together with messaging that works for them without suffering the problem that Blair faced, that the Lib Dems have faced, where you do offer too many different things to too many people, you de-radicalize your messaging, and then you end up letting everyone down?
Well, just to say, Chris, I don't know if you were summarising what I said, if you were giving your own opinions. I don't entirely agree with what you've just said at the beginning of that, but I won't go into that because obviously that would take up time and that's not really the point of why we're chatting. But this is indeed the important challenge that we've got in the year ahead. And the problem is we live in a majoritarian system. So to get elected, you have to get a majority. And that's why Labour's the sort of massively internally divided party it is. In a proportional system, it would obviously be two parties, so would the Conservatives. And we would then be able to stick to our very clear message, and we would get like 15% like the Greens in Austria do, and we'd be in government. And that's the kind of political world we want to live in. But we have to compromise because we live in this political system. So assuming you want to get more MPs, which I think is just urgently a priority for the party, so does the strategy say that, then we do indeed need to get a majority of people to vote for us in one place. But I would say it's not about offering everything to everybody, and it's not actually about compromising our radical vision. It's about focusing on issues that have a broad appeal. And there are quite a few issues like that that are extremely radical, as Mick Lynch has demonstrated in recent weeks. So, for example, public ownership of railways is widely popular. Well-paid public sector jobs, so supporting the high, the inflation plus rises that the public sector workers are going to be calling for in the next few months. Those policies are actually pretty widely popular, and so I think it's more a question of choosing radical policies that have a wide appeal than de-radicalizing our policies, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. But I would say the key to all of this is fairness. Everybody's going to be talking about fairness at the next election, but when we say fairness, we mean something considerably more radical than any other party's offering. And it does mean, for example, wealth tax would be part of our fairness agenda. I don't think Labour will support that. And if they do, it'll be quite a feeeble wealth tax. But, well, we'll call it tax on the super rich, right? Because a lot of people think they're wealthy when they're not the people that would face the tax. So again, that's another thing that you're doing when you're communicating. You're making sure that you're not alienating people who actually would benefit from your policies. So, for example, inheritance tax is incredibly unpopular because the Daily Express constantly runs campaigns against inheritance tax, but less than 5% of estates go into inheritance tax. So nearly everybody benefits from inheritance tax. So that's another thing with the message. You have to make sure that you frame it in a way that people who benefit from it recognize it as something they benefit from. So yeah, I would say it's more a question of choosing carefully. We've got a limited amount of airtime, right, as the Green Party, and a limited amount of resources. So what we're trying to do is focus on those messages that appeal to the largest number of people who might vote for us without alienating other people who might vote for us. And yeah, and that's, I think we'll succeed in doing that without de-radicalizing, because enough of what you and I might think of as our radical policies, whether that's a much more progressive tax system or public ownership and so on, those policies are actually popular. So, I mean, I'm focusing a lot on the economic side now, and obviously a lot of other policies, like our housing policy is also extremely popular, you know, but mostly what we'll be having to do is work out what, in the little tiny space we've got to thread through, what are the key things to say. And I do think a lot of it this time will be about the economy, and I do think it will be about fairness. And I think we'll come up with things that actually you're quite happy with and I'm quite happy with, but actually aren't alienating that majority of voters we need to get to support us.
So I think you've articulated a vision quite clear there as to how you can communicate radicalism to the wider public. Now, you mentioned a bunch of different kind of policies and ideas that you kind of see as popular with the electorate, but have a kind of radical transformative effect. Now, some people watching this will be thinking one of those policies would be a £15 an hour minimum wage, which some people will be aware that at the last Green Party autumn conference, the conference almost unanimously backed adopting £15 an hour minimum wage as Green Party policy. And there's opinion polls which show that's a hugely popular policy. And, you know, in the current cost of living crisis, where, you know, there's increasing militancy within the trade union movement demanding decent wages, that actually this is exactly the sort of time the Green Party should be talking about that kind of economic policy that would be transformative. Now, lots of people have noticed that the Green Party appears to be, in terms of its public communications on social media and its spokespeople, reticent to talk about that £15 an hour minimum wage policy. How would you respond to that criticism?
So the motion that was passed at conference was very specifically about a particular demand by a particular union, the Bakers and Allied Trades, or whatever their name is. It wasn't a general policy of £15 minimum wage across the private sector. I've checked that with Martin Hemingway, who was chairing SOC, and told me explicitly that he wouldn't have given permission for that to go ahead as an emergency motion if it had been so wide-ranging, because, you know, the nature of emergency motions is they cannot change fundamental policy. Plus, Vix, who is the policy coordinator, that's also her interpretation. I would just, so that's why we're not saying that our policy is £15 minimum wage, because what was passed was an emergency motion with a very specific focus rather than a general policy. Now, if people want to put that policy forward to conference, I don't think I've seen a motion coming to this autumn conference, but if people do want to do that, oh, there is one, okay. So as finance and economy spokesperson, I would say that in order to vote for that myself, I take your points about the need for justice. And actually, we're getting to an imbalance now between private sector wages and public sector wages, which is problematic. But I would need to see the impact of that. You know, I would need to see some work showing the incidence of that and the impact of that, especially in places like Cornwall or, you know, poorer areas, basically poorer areas of the economy. My concern would be that would have a negative impact on businesses. And until I've seen that, I personally don't feel very confident about that as a policy. I would say that as a political party, if we say £15 minimum wage for people in the public sector, I'm really not saying external comms now. I've got my economy and finance hat on now, to be honest with you, because I just put forward what the policy is. So I've answered that part. But, you know, for your interest and for the interest of people who might watch this, if you're talking about wages in the public sector, you set those wages and you make sure you have the money to pay those wages, either by creating that money directly or through taxation. So you have complete control of that. If you're talking about private sector wages, then it's effectively you as the government can make a rule about that, but other people have to find the money to pay those wages, and those are the people that run businesses. And so you have a different kind of power there. And in my view, it wouldn't be responsible to set a minimum wage without having an understanding of how that's going to impact on people who actually run businesses and create jobs and keep people in work. So that's why I remain to be convinced that we're ready for a £15 minimum wage everywhere, in all sectors, at all ages. Personally, I don't think you should have a minimum wage that differentiates by age. So that means if everybody in the economy in the private sector is paid £15, I would need to be convinced that that would not have a negative impact on certain regional economies. And I just haven't seen that data. I've seen the work from the Progressive Economy Alliance, which I think makes some good points about how you could then restore that money through giving tax breaks to those businesses. But I think we'd have to sit down and really work that through. Because if I had to sit in a TV studio and defend that at the moment, I don't feel I'm ready to do that.
So before we move on to a separate issue, I just, for viewers, I should probably declare an interest on that particular policy point, because I'm currently on the committee of the Green Party Trade Union Group, which is one of the bodies bringing forward the £15 an hour minimum wage policy to the next autumn conference. So with that out of the way, one of the other policy areas that I think members in particular over the last few months have felt particularly aggrieved about in terms of the way the Green Party has communicated it has been around the party's position on the monarchy and the head of state. And for people watching who aren't aware, the Green Party has put out over the Jubilee that happened earlier this year, and also previously social media posts that have thanked the Queen for her service, but not talked about our policy opposing the hereditary nature of the head of state we have in England and Wales. And I guess without wanting to get necessarily into the specifics of that particular issue, I guess the broader question this raises for me is, going back to what we were talking about earlier about speaking to different groups and so on. To me, there's a question there about whether sometimes in our communications, there's a risk when you're putting out messages and messaging that has the potential to alienate members and activists, with a view nonetheless to appeal to certain other portions of the electorate and the public, that actually that can be really unhelpful in terms of demotivating activists and members who are ultimately the people that you need to get out knocking on doors and delivering leaflets to get Greens elected. So what would you say to that?
You're right that there can be a tension between the sort of messages that activists want to see, some activists want to see, and a wider electoral appeal. But I have to say, some people were incredibly upset about this, but it was a relatively small number of people. I received maybe 2 or 3 emails the first time around, and I didn't receive any emails about the second communication about the Jubilee. Now, I seem to have got a reputation as a monarchy lover, but I actually had to leave the country. I was going to go to Wales, but in the end I went to France because I cannot bear the flag waving. So I should make it really clear that it's not my decision what happens here. It's not my personal decision. Anyway, these decisions are made in a leaders and comms group together with the staff. And I think what we were trying to do, some people thought we succeeded in this, some people didn't, and I am hearing that from the people that think we didn't. But what we were trying to do was to say thank you to the Queen for her personal service. Now, some people don't want to do that. Some people would like wear Burn the Queen t-shirts. I get that, but that's not where the country is, I think. And personally, I do agree with recognising public service. So it was quite a delicate line we were trying to tread. The first thing really that I've got to say is I don't think as the Green Party we should be absent from a major national event. So we could have said nothing. Some people thought we should do that. I think that would have been wrong. The second thing is, do we then use the Queen's Jubilee, a sort of national celebration, as an opportunity to tell people that we want to get rid of the monarch? I think that would have caused offence. So again, I don't think that would have been wise. So I think we were left with thing 3, which was like a bland appreciation of service, nothing more. So when the Duke of Edinburgh died, for example, I think we said thank you to the Duke of Edinburgh for setting up the awards scheme, which introduced a lot of young people to nature, or something like that. Actually, I don't think people were very upset about that, although they disliked the Duke of Edinburgh more than they tend to dislike the Queen, for reasons I think we all understand. But so I think the problem with these communications was the picture. I still think it was the picture both times, and I think we could and should have done better with a more empowered picture of the Queen. There are plenty of pictures of the Queen that would have caused less offence, I think. But my judgment is still that it was right to say something about that and not to use what is a respectful celebration, whatever you think about it yourself. The national mood was generally one of respect and appreciation. I think it would have been damaging to use that to say, hey, we want to get rid of the Queen. To be honest with you, I think the Queen is going to die soon. That's, whatever you think about it, she's old, and that's kind of an inevitability. And then we will do something very low key and respectful, regardless of whether I'm in this post. I think that's what will happen. And then I really think the debate will move on quite rapidly, because I don't think people will have the same feeling about Prince Charles. So I would say, for people who were very offended by that, I'm sorry about that. I think we will probably be in agreement about what to do, when the Queen's life comes to an end. And I think then it will be time to really open this up, because I think the question of whether it's appropriate to have a head of state, a hereditary head of state, will really come into the political debate in a big way then. And I think we need to update our policy, Chris, if you want to do more policy work, because it's not, we've got a completely bonkers thing at the moment where there's this kind of council and this person, a bit like how you get local mayors. Now, I don't think anybody is going to live with that. If we want an elected head of state, we have to find a sensible way of doing that. And at the moment in our constitution, I've got to say, from a comms point of view, saying that we have this council over here and they, the person they elect as their chair becomes the head of state. I mean, I would have real trouble communicating that as a sort of sensible way to choose your head of state. So if you want to get ready for, the next phase of this, then I would suggest you or others who are very worked up about this find a what seems like a consensual and sensible way of electing a head of state.
It's a very clear invitation from Molly there for viewers who want to strengthen the party's position on the head of state. So I have one final question that's kind of role specific before I ask a couple more that are kind of slightly broader about GPEx more widely. So you mentioned earlier the kind of spokesperson list that the Green Party has. And I just wanted to ask you, how do you think that the spokespeople could be better supported so that we can make the best use of all the talent in the party?
This is a question of resources, and it's a very difficult question. And when I came into this role, we had a head of comms and one press officer, basically, for a party of our size. For everything people expect us to do, that's what we've got. We do now have another press officer who's focused on Greens in Power and partly funded by the Green councillors, and that's really amazingly improved things, just having one extra person there. Plus we have a designer and a social media person, but it's an incredibly small team. So we do give the spokespeople some training, and to be honest with you, they're doing an amazing job. But if you look at the code of conduct and the role description we give them, it does tell them that it's mostly about, it's not asked what the party can do for you. It's very much about what you can do for the party. And to be fair, I think they're amazing. They really rise to that. They become experts across their particular brief. And then they're available if we need advice, and they're also available to be quoted in press statements. We are going to get them together at conference and organise some more training there. But like I said, to me, the priority is much more about making sure that we're heard across all the policy areas, because polling shows very clearly that people don't vote for us in parliamentary elections because they don't think we are a party of government, and that's largely because they only hear from us on a very narrow range of issues. So the spokespeople are absolutely crucial there in making sure we've got expertise and we're heard across a wider range of issues. But it's also important that we practice what we preach in terms of diversity and representation. And that's why, to me, that's the most important thing. And then particularly encouraging and supporting Greens of colour who are coming forward to act as spokespeople. Yeah, that's something Gemma and I both prioritise, and we sort of mentor people on an individual basis, as well as doing as much training as we can for the spokespeople as a whole.
So if you were elected as External Communications Coordinator, or re-elected rather, you'd be part of the wider GPEx, which holds responsibility for the kind of financial well-being of the party, the day-to-day management of it, and the reputation of the party, amongst other things. So you'd be making decisions beyond the kind of obvious portfolio that you'd be holding. So I wanted to ask you really, what do you think the biggest challenge is that's facing the Green Party right now?
We haven't got enough money. It's completely obvious. I mean, if you compare what we do with our budget with what the other parties do with their massive budgets, it's a complete miracle that this works at all. you know, we're now the fourth party. We get asked to do, this is brilliant. We've taken a step up in the view of broadcasters. We're now invited to do a lot of things that previously we would have been left out of, and that's fantastic. But then when you compare the sort of shoestring that we're functioning with, you know, it's just a daily miracle that that happens at all. And there's a problem, obviously, with getting money, because rich people don't like our policies. And, you know, there's a reason the Tories have the most money. And so, again, it's another situation where we're going to have to manage quite a lot of tensions. But I just think we have to do a lot better at raising money through the official channels, through our development committee and our development team. And of course, we've just got a new head of development, and that will really help there. But also, you know, just informally and through our own connections and so on, we just have to ask rich people for money. I'm sorry, it's the easiest way to raise money. And there are people who have enough money to give money to the party who do agree with our radical policies, and we have to be more systematic about asking them to donate. Incidentally, we've had some really welcome bequests this past year, which have made a big difference. And I think that's something that we should focus on. You know, I think green willpower, I asked them to set up a green willpower type system, because at the moment we raise far too much of our money from membership, from our members, and not enough from other people. So, I mean, that's overwhelmingly the most important thing.
So one of the other challenges that I think the party is facing right now, and I think most people within the Greens acknowledge this, is around issues of discrimination and diversity within the party. So just for some context, we have a deputy leadership election that's going on concurrently with the GPEx elections. There are 4 candidates in that election, all of whom are men from London. We also, you know, if you look at the Green Party from the bottom to the top, from its elected representatives to target candidates, paper candidates, representatives on committees, the lot, the party is overwhelmingly white. And then also, you know, we have a situation at the moment where the kind of scourge of transphobia that's being whipped up by not just the Tory press anymore, but the press more broadly, as well as, you know, the Tory party centrally. You know, in this leadership election, all but one of the candidates has kind of frontlined anti-LGBT and anti-trans rhetoric in their campaigns. And that scourge has infected parts of the Green Party as well. So, and we also, you know, just a couple of weeks ago, the Diverse Matters report was published, looking at issues of diversity and discrimination within the party. So as a member of GPEx, how would you work to tackle these issues going forward?
So the reason I joined GPEx was because while I was being an MEP, I could see that there was a conflict at the heart of the party that I thought was threatening the future of the party that I've given my life to. And that is a key reason I joined GPEx. And the Diverse Matters report confirms that the conflict over trans rights is an existential threat to the party. So it's a job for all of us to address that conflict. I think that this issue is divisive in all political parties, and it is sucking energy out of other areas of our party activity. So we have to address that issue. Now, it's not an easy issue to address because people on all sides hold their views very strongly, but we have got various processes underway already in terms of how we can discuss this. I personally think we need to have clear definition of what we consider to be transphobia and what we consider to be unacceptable in the party. Until we have that, it's very difficult to address this issue. What would result in disciplinary action? What is just really unhelpful language? Please don't say that. And what is an acceptable area for political debate? At the moment, everybody defines those 3 things in a different way, and that really gives rise to a lot of the conflict. So to me, that will be a start. I don't know if that is going to happen because it's not really my bag to do that, but this is one of the reasons I came back. I have worked very hard to try to enable people to have the right to hold their views, but without those views into, you know, basically diminishing other people's human rights. And it's very difficult to do that in a situation where, as you say, this, in a most fucking atrocious way, quite honestly. Trans people are being used as a sort of vehicle for other people's political conflicts. That's the bit I find, for people who are already so vulnerable and so attacked in society, for them to be used in this political way is just appalling, just shocking and appalling. Most people in our party don't want to do that, but they accidentally slip into that. And so I think we need clear parameters about what we as a party think is acceptable. And this is a GPRC job. It's really not a GPEx job, which is why, you know, but I come back to the Diverse Matters report. I'm constantly saying, please do more on this, because it's an existential threat to the party. We need the Green Party to be there to protect the rights of people, because we've still got the best policy on this in terms of self-ID, but also because we need to be out there, you know, propagating our other policies, which are more radical on the economy, and obviously addressing the environmental crisis, which everybody else doesn't really understand. So we need to get this issue sorted. Now, on the issue of representation and diversity, that's also something where obviously that also is investigated by the Diverse Matters report. And I'm pleased that we've taken the step of organising that report, because it does give us some very clear recommendations on how we should work on this. So I've got no expertise here at all, but as I said, you know, my job here particularly is to support people of colour who, as you say, are underrepresented across the party, but my job is to make sure that they're properly represented in terms of people who speak for us. And we have, I mean, the list is still not good enough, but we have brought in 2 people of colour in the latest round, and we, you know, our intention is to bring in more. And when that is our priority, Gemma and myself, when we're looking at that list. So, you know, we can't resolve the issue of the poor representation of people of colour in our party from the comms side. But if you think about what Channel 4 News did, I think so many of the people of colour who are now leading journalists started at Channel 4 News, because Channel 4 News was just like, we're not looking to represent people of colour fairly here, we're looking to massively over-represent them, and that's what they did. And I think we should take a similar position for that. It's not about, it's about understand. So men in our party, I've asked men in our party, you know, God, there's so many women, don't you think, you know, we need to get more gender balance? And they're like, no, men have had too much power for too long in this society. You need to, it's not you need to step up and do the job. Sometimes I think that, but that's not what they say. No, you know, it's time for women now. And I think we need to take the same approach with people of colour, actually. I think that's the only way we're going to resolve this. And so to come back to your point about the deputy leader, I mean, this kind of brings these 2 issues together, because my view is a lot of the feminists in the party have been spending a lot of time on the trans issue and not making sure they had a candidate in the deputy leader. But I think that's a shame, quite honestly. But I am, from a purely comms point of view, I will be glad to have somebody in London, because our co-leaders are outside London, and sometimes just from a purely technical point of view, that is a problem. And we've got some good people there. As a woman, I'm sort of slightly disappointed that we're going to have more men than women in our leadership team, probably for the first time ever, I think. But we do have an awful lot of powerful women around the party, so I feel fairly confident we can deal with that. In terms of LGBT, I'm very pleased that Rhea Patel is now in our spokespeople list. I think she's going to be great there, and she's going to be properly supported. That's important. But we don't have that many straight white men in the list. I don't want to, you know, itemize everybody, but if you look at that list, we really have been quite careful about this, and I think we're doing pretty well. But what is not happening is people feeding through. You know, it's what you said. We need to make sure that, like in Oxford, you have make sure you have people of colour who, not just candidates, but who become councillors, and everybody across the party needs to do that. London especially, I think, has a big responsibility here to make sure that, you know, that they don't ever have pictures without people of colour in them. And that's, I hope that recommendations like that will come out of the work that Diverse Matters are doing. I mean, the only thing I can say encouragingly about this is we're really on it now. It's sort of shameful that you don't notice things that you don't notice, you know, but we are noticing now. You're noticing, I'm noticing. We're making this a priority for the party. And I think the next phase, Diverse Matters as a subcommittee working on that, but I think the next phase will be to say to every party in the country, look, you have to do this, we have to do this, but you have to do this as well. Every local party has to do this. They have to do it when they're thinking about their candidates and so on. And just from a personal point of view, this was partly because of my involvement in the Green Party, but it was also because of the Black Lives Matter movement and, you know, my rethinking during lockdown. I do notice now that when I'm the only white person in the room, it really jars with me. I'm used to often being the only woman in the room, and I'll always speak out about that because that's my particular oppression. But I am now noticing much more when I'm the only, you know, when we're all white people in the room, and I think that's what we have to do. We have to just keep calling that out. We have to take that responsibility as people who have the privilege to just have much more awareness. And I think as a party, I do think we're progressing there. And it's embarrassing that it's taken us so long, but let's at least celebrate that we've got that report, it's got recommendations, and that work's being taken forward.
So my final question for you is much more flippant than the ones we've been dealing with so far, and it's
Don't say it's
simple and
what kind
straightforward.
of biscuit.
It's not biscuit. It is who in the Green Party inspires you the most?
Do you know what? Actually, I have been really inspired. It's terrifying. So it's a post-COVID thing. I'm tearful all the time. The most ridiculous. I've worked quite a lot with Zai Neal recently, and yeah, it goes back to what we were saying just now. She's really given me a lot of insights. So I don't know. Yeah, and she has inspired me. I think she's incredibly courageous, and she's also not afraid to just say no when that has to be said. And I thought when she made that speech at conference, I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I thought it was a magical moment. And yeah, I think she's been an inspiration to me in many ways over these past couple of years working with her on the exec.
Yeah, thank you so much, Molly, for joining me today. And where can people find out more about your campaign?
That's a good question. I'm not doing anything that's not part of the official campaigning process. I probably will make a video, but because I live on my own, I'll have to get somebody to come and hold the phone. So I haven't actually got around to that yet, but I will do that before voting starts. But I've put my statement there, and I guess people can sort of, yeah, I say in the statement what I've been doing, and I'll also write a report to Autumn Conference, which I'm happy to share with people. People shouldn't use that XComs email now, I don't think. I think it's better to probably to email me direct. Yeah, I'm not sure I want to give my email though, but yeah. So what is the answer to that question? If people have specific questions to me, maybe if they go to that XCOM emails just so I get them, and then I'll reply personally, because I know that Dylan doesn't have access to that.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for joining me today, Molly, and thank you to everyone for watching. Before I let you all go, I just have a few things to let you know. The first is what I said at the beginning, which is that you really should scroll down right now and hit subscribe. If you found this interview useful, interesting, engaging, if it's informed how you're likely to vote in the election, if you're a member, then please do hit subscribe right now, and you won't miss any of the other interviews we've got coming up in the coming weeks. We still have, I think, close to a dozen of these interviews to come out, so there's lots to keep on top of. The second thing I wanted to let you know is that I'm sure you've heard plenty in this conversation that you agree with. You'll have thoughts on other bits, and there may even be some elements that you've disagreed with. Whatever you think, please do let us know in the comments down below and keep the conversation going down there. The penultimate thing to let you know is that you may or may not be aware, but Bright Green doesn't have the backing of big business or billionaires. We rely solely on the kind and generous contributions of people just like you. So if you are able to, please do head to bright-green.org/donate and set up a regular donation so that we can keep putting out videos like this, run more articles, analysis, comment, interviews, and so on the UK's Green parties, on the Labour movement, social movements, and the wider left. And finally, we are running loads of stories at the moment on the deputy leadership election, on the GPEx elections. You can find all of that on our website, bright-green.org. So head there and keep on track of what's going on. So that's all from me. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all very soon.